Good afternoon, Ministers, Permanent Secretaries, and Director General. My first question, Mr. Attorney General and Mr. for Economies, when can we expect the new government budget out, considering the money that will go into implementing some of these measures, with particular reference to the fact that we can expect a lot of people affected by the unemployment to be applying for example, bus fare subsidies in the new normal? Sorry, Lydia Movono for my TV.
Sure, we'll be announcing the date in the next few weeks regarding the specific date of the budget. But you can be rest assured that should, for example, next week or week after next, more parents go and apply for bus fare subsidies, there's enough accommodation within the existing budget to be able to cater for that.
In the past, you had initiatives that took care of food, meals in schools. There's a very real threat that there are now families unable to provide enough 3 meals a day without even thinking about students. Is this something that is in your framework or something you will consider under social protection measures?
We have not given food. We actually had the milk subsidy that we provided. It's not food per se. But of course, as you know, that we have unemployment benefits that we're giving out. So those parents who actually are now no longer employed, we pay on a fortnightly basis to those people. They can collect those unemployment benefits, which we channel through the FNPF and deposit directly into their account. But most certainly, I mean, one of the reasons, of course, that we are, in terms of developing the budget, we are gathering as much data as possible. And obviously, data is critically important. As highlighted by the Honourable Prime Minister, the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Tourism carried out a survey with the IFC regarding the businesses. There's currently a survey being carried out between the Ministry of Employment and ILO to look at unemployment rates, which sectors are there. So the moment you have more data available, then it actually helps you make better and informed decisions.
Considering the Pacific pathways and the Mbula bubble and maybe even the Mbula lanes, when do you expect to rehire national airline staff, cabin crew and people like that to facilitate the travel when we do open up to our neighbors?
The hiring is done by Fiji Airways, of course. It's not the government of Fiji that hires people who work for Fiji Airways. It's a prerogative of Fiji Airways, the company, which is an independent entity. They'll do the hiring of people. But as you know, this announcement, obviously, if, for example, tomorrow, with the announcement being made today, say, 200 tourists will say, we want to go to Fiji now, they obviously still have to go through the 14-day quarantine measures. They have to be able to then identify the hotel that they will go to. All of those need to be put in place. So it's not going to, it's not like overnight people will be coming. So there is a particular level of leeway because of the measures that's required to be adhered to. So we expect that to obviously have a natural rollout program. And when that happens, I'm sure Fiji Airways will do the necessary, operational matters will be put into place.
So I realize this might be outside of your portfolio, but I'll try my luck anyway. With regards to the fact that there is still a curfew in place, were there some implications or maybe consideration with regards to crime and safety in that respect in your decision to keep the curfew?
We can tell you that a lot of people actually wanted the curfew hours to be maintained. Most of the people wanted some relaxation, but not a complete lifting of the curfew hours. So you'll find a lot of public support for the hours that have actually been announced.
Hi, I'm Shanil from Fiji Village. My question is for the Minister for Education. For students whose parents may have lost their jobs and are struggling, I know you've mentioned that they can apply for bus fare schemes. Are there any plans to assist them? Is there any message for them?
I think thank you for the question. We've cleared the issue of transport assistance. I think the Attorney General has clarified about unemployment benefits rendered to those parents who are unemployed. And again, if I can say, we'll have to get students back in school. Once school starts, then we may be able to ascertain what sort of assistance is needed by them. I did mention psychosocial support, and AG added on that the parents have access to the unemployment benefits. It stays at that.
What steps have been taken to ensure all students return to school to avoid a large dropout, particularly since some students may have become uninterested in school?
I don't know where you get that from, that students are uninterested in schools. We've kept all our students engaged through a number of activities, if I can mention some. We kept our schools open, we had our worksheets, we had our website that continued to provide those who could access learning materials. We had the new education channel through Walesi. So that was done to ensure that our children remain engaged. And I'd like to appeal to all the parents that they must ensure that their children return to school. And so we can continue with the normal education of all our children.
Okay. For students who may have lost everything during the TC Herald, including stationery and uniforms, is there any plan for them? Can they actually go to school without uniforms and stationery?
Yes, I've already mentioned the number of schools that have been affected, especially in the Lower Southern Lao group, the Kandavu, Vatulele, and in the Central Division. Actually, as I speak, a government vessel has left for the Lao group with the much required stationery and tents, stationery packs, school textbooks and other resources that was asked of us from the schools. And another government vessel is supposed to leave for Kandavu, especially for that purpose, to provide the much, if they have lost learning resources. We've worked with DISMEC. The education team has been on and off the island trying to gauge the level of assessment. And I will be accompanying the team on Wednesday or Thursday as the weather permits us, to see that we deliver those items to the affected schools and the communities.
Okay, so just to confirm, if they have lost their uniforms, can they go back to school without uniforms?
Sure, we don't have any issues with that. We want our children to come back to school.
Pranita from FBC News. Just in relation to year 12 and 13 external examination dates, does it remain the same or has that been moved as well?
Obviously, it has moved as well. The examination dates have moved, and like I said, a circular is currently being prepared by the Acting Permanent Secretary, and the dates will be conveyed to the divisions and, of course, the heads of schools and communicated to the students and the parents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ministers and permanent secretaries, as well as the general director. Just my question is with regards to, second semester starting for tertiary students and for those that are either in Solomon Islands or other Pacific Island countries that are not mentioned in the Pacific pathway. Will they be allowed to come into the country, and what sort of steps are in place to ensure they visit either to go to the tertiary institution of their choice?
I think because it's a sort of border issue, but the point is a lot of universities actually have been hosting, as you know, classes online. We've had FNU students, USP students having classes online, so it's not like they've had a huge gap. So that's number one. Number two, of course, as you know, we've also set up the Pacific Pathway. There's a requirement of quarantine. We've had people coming from other countries, again, as assessed by Ministry of Health and Medical Services. They'll have to go through those, the health, stringent requirements in terms of their entry to Fiji. But that's not to say they've been missing out on their classes, because a lot of them, for example, have been either going to the campus in their countries or going online directly themselves on from home and accessing those classes.
Thank you very much. By the way, Corey Tontola from FBC.
Thank you. Marioni Mili from Fiji One News. My question is directed to the Director General. Just on how can you assure that the Care Fiji app is safe with countries like New Zealand and Australia raising privacy issues?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. That's a really good question. Just in terms of the privacy safeguards for the Care Fiji app, the design of the app, it's built on a privacy by design approach. So with regards to the app, the actual identities of the Care Fiji users is protected. As you would have seen in the video, the only exchange that's done, if I have my phone, I've downloaded the app, I have my Bluetooth turned on, Acting Permanent Secretary Health also has his turned on. There is a digital handshake that occurs depending on how close you are to the person who has installed the app and have their Bluetooth turned on. So the actual, my details do not get transferred. So just as Bluetooth technology, how you would use your wireless headphones and all that, that's basically how it works. No other personal information is required when you register for the Care Fiji app. When you look at other countries, they would require your name. Some countries have your age, your address. So in terms of personal information, the only personal information that is required is your mobile number. Now, the reason why that's required is so that you can activate your account on the Care Fiji app, and also in the event that you have cross paths with a COVID-19 patient, they will be able to, the Ministry of Health and Medical Services contact tracing team will be able to contact you at the earliest. So that's basically why the mobile phone is required. The other measure that we've taken is that all of the Care Fiji, all of the information, the only information that is exchanged is a anonymized and encrypted mobile number that's sent across. The other information is the timestamp, the date, and the duration. How close were you to that person? So if, for God forbid, I do get it, say, next week, this date would show that I was close to Dr. Fong and whoever has it around me. The app wouldn't be able to tell whether on this particular date I was here in Suvavou House or I was in Nosori. It won't track your location because it's using Bluetooth technology. The other thing is that all the information is stored securely on your phone in an anonymized format, so even I can access that information. It'll only be able to be accessed by the Ministry of Health and Medical Services once I consent to sending that information across. And even with the information, it's minimal information. It'll be an encrypted, anonymized mobile reference, the date, the time, and the duration of the close proximity. You would also see that there's a privacy policy that's on, when you do register for the app, please do have a read of that, and it's also available on the website. The other thing is that if you do uninstall the app from your phone, which we discourage, all the information that's there will be permanently deleted. So in order to protect your safety and your loved ones and those around you, the recommendation is to have it. No one has access to it until and unless you consent to sending it across to the Ministry of Health and Medical Services, but only then it is just the contact number so that they can call those individuals and inform them, give them health advice, and ask them to self-isolate should they come into contact with a COVID-19 patient.
Thank you so much.
This is a question on the app. Considering that the mobile service providers and therefore the government has access to who owns the mobile numbers that you get, you in effect have access to that information as well. My concern is when you do consent to the Ministry of Health and Medical Services getting access to our information, given the security breaches during the response to the crisis, what reassurance can you give the public that such security breaches have been investigated, people have been taken to task, and that our information is actually safe to those we consent to give it to? Leave there from my TV.
Okay, so with regards to the actual information that is sent, it is just the mobile numbers, and even then it's in encrypted and anonymized form. There is no name, you don't get the name of the person, you don't get the owner's details. So as far as the Ministry of Health and Medical Services contact tracing team, when they do get this information, they will be calling these numbers once consent is given from the individual to send the numbers across. They will then be calling up all these individuals and then continue with the manual contact tracing efforts. So the Care Fiji app is there to ensure that the contact tracers get to you at the earliest if you have cross paths with a COVID-19 patient. With regards to the security of the information that's there, it is secure, it's stored securely on your phone. You can't access it, you can't view it. And when it is sent across, it is merely just the mobile number, the date, the time, and the duration, the close proximity. Once they get that information, they will then do the manual contact tracing, calling up all these numbers and telling them that they've been in close contact, they could be a potential case, and then also advise them.
I'd like a response to from the Permanent Secretary with regards to the security breaches, because with all due respect, once you have someone's phone number, you just have to stick it on some of the big Fiji Facebook groups and you can find that person. how can the public be sure that the Ministry of Health and their staff are actually safe and will protect our personal information?
I think, thank you, Live. All throughout the acute phase of the pandemic, what has happened has always been that it is a small group of people who do the necessary investigation for contact tracing. And that small group of people then sort out the necessary details that are required for us to contain those who have been traced. Now, every medical staff are under confidentiality clauses if they are to be engaged in any medical work. And in fact, the whole group of rapid response teams are under that confidentiality clause. And they all are aware that any breaches of such a clause is a trigger for heavy penalty. Nobody is allowed to do that at all. I'm not aware of anybody who's actually posted the actual correct names of those that we are looking for. But I am aware of people who have posted false information that relate to our contact tracing team. We have dealt with it. But be assured that we have taken the necessary measures, and we've learned a few lessons also in the course of the acute phase to ensure that moving forward, we will keep all details are confidential. There is only a small group of people who will actually be able to read the contact details. And then basically the rapid response teams are people who will just know where to go to.
Mr. Attorney General, my question is with regards to the opening of some of the close contact businesses, as we've been calling them, cinemas, swimming pools, things like that. And with reference to the conditions that the Prime Minister has outlined, for example, disinfecting the place, providing washing stations and things like that, and doing extra things which we imagine will be an added expense to them. What sort of penalties or deterrents have you got in place to ensure that when these close contact establishments reopen, that they will actually follow your guidelines and thereby provide the safety assurance that the public needs?
As the Honourable Prime Minister highlighted, I think on a number of occasions in his address this afternoon, that we are focusing essentially on self-regulation. This needs to be a community-driven effort. It's not about taking the big stick. It's about also a lot of these businesses have been saying we want to get into business, we want to start getting revenue flowing, the people who are working there, they want to come back to work. And as the Acting Permanent Secretary for Health highlighted, that we need to take a staggered approach. It's a balancing of your health risks versus your economic recovery. And this we've spent quite a lot of time. There's been a lot of consultations that have taken place. Many of the businesses, for example, the gyms, they want to open up. And they want to adhere to the conditions because they know if they don't, there's perhaps a opportunity for them to not remain open anymore. So it's self-regulation. And as the Honourable Prime Minister highlighted, the only regulation where you actually can have penalties if you break the curfew. The curfew is actually what is imposed. But in respect of how you manage your gym, how you manage your cinema, how you're managing your swimming pool, etc., is all being laid out quite very much in detail. It's all in here. Numerous consultations have taken place. And the Ministry of Health, of course, through the health inspectors, will be monitoring this. As also highlighted by the Honourable Prime Minister, like with the sporting events, 50% of the facilities can be filled up. So you may have a sporting facility that can fit 10,000 people sitting down. So they can fit, they'll have 5,000 people. And again, as the Honourable Prime Minister highlighted, they'll be monitoring that. Of course, if people's behavior changes, things improve, then we can increase the numbers. Same thing with the cinemas. And they're willing to, of course, be able to adapt to the new norm, as the Honourable Prime Minister highlighted. These are the new norms. That's part and parcel of running a business now. And of course, people will need to adhere to that, because if they don't adhere to it, then they probably won't have any business at all.
Can the Minister for Education please highlight when will school finish this year, and will it go till December?
Obviously, when I mentioned the date, I said term 3. That's the conclusive term for the year is from 28th September to 18th of December.
Just a follow-up question, how will teachers catch up with the face-to-face classes to ensure they finish the curriculum?
We have actually, like I said, used the word realigned curriculum. Okay, and what we have decided is normally term 2. When we finished with week 10 of term 1 when we closed our schools, and term 1 and term 2 is mostly focused on a lot of activities that are extracurricular, sporting activities. So we will be foregoing all the extracurricular activities and sporting activities, competitive sports. Obviously, children will be exposed to normal sporting activities, but we will be utilizing the time for competitive sports to ensure that the coverage of work is completed. And like I said, examinations is only for year 12 and 13. And in any normal school year, term 1 and term 2 is mostly used to cover the coverage. So and we've taken out the holidays, now will be only, term 2 will have 1 week school holidays. So all those time would be utilized. But again, if I could emphasize to our heads of school teachers, we will not pressure our children for Saturday classes and extra classes. 8 to 4 is ample time for us to complete the required coverage and prepare our year 12 and 13 for exams. The rest of the classes will undergo school-based assessments.
Hi, Corey again from FBC. My question is to the Education Minister. With regards to students returning to school and ensuring that all principals ensure that schools are COVID-19 proof, what do you mean by COVID-19 proof? How do you mean like the teachers will be equipped with particular skills to ensure there's no transmission of, if there is any potential case of COVID-19 in school?
If I can go back to the Ministry of Health framework, all schools will be mandated to follow the guidelines given by the Ministry of Health, and our heads of schools will be very closely working. Ministry of Education will be very closely working with the Ministry of Health to ensure that our schools are safe. And I think the 3 months that we have missed out, there has been a lot of information that has been that has gone out to the community from the health perspective, and our teachers, our divisions. And our Director of Primary and Secondary have been having cluster meetings with respective heads of schools in the division in preparedness for this reopening. So I will let Dr. Fong talk more about that and the specifics of that. Thank you.
Yes, in regards to the schools, there's been a lot of work that we've done with the Ministry of Education in guiding how they can sort out things like hand sanitizers, make sure that it's easily accessible. Behavior patterns of how the COVID-safe behavior within the schools have been discussed quite extensively, and you'll see that in the document that our Attorney General has highlighted. In that respect, just to move it a little bit forward, in the scientific world, it's becoming clearly evident now that school children, young people, they do not push the pandemic as much as adults. That is a clear evidence that is beginning to articulate itself quite well, which is one of the reasons why we were able to get the Ministry of Education to escalate our education system a little bit more in terms of getting our kids back. The other thing that we as health workers have come to understand is that children not getting to school is really, really not good at all for anybody's long-term outcomes, both in terms of health outcomes and economic outcomes. And as a team on the health, we are very, very cognizant of the fact that we need a lot more educated children coming out through the workforce to sustain many of the efforts that are required to raise our socioeconomic level and therefore better the health outcomes. So like I said, we've discussed this a lot, and I'm very confident that moving forward there'll be a lot more lessons to be learned, but I'm very confident that we are at a good place at this point in time to get our schools to open safely.
Still on schools, we've been having some questions from the general public about the concerns of boarding schools and students going to boarding schools. Is there any particular way in which this situation will be handled in dormitories?
When we discuss the physical distancing issue, one of the things that we will have to educate people about is this concept called bubble. So once you go into a dormitory, you're part of a bubble. So the prerogative is really on each individual in that bubble to protect each other from those outside the bubble. It the same means that as a family, like when you stay within your nuclear family, you're a bubble. And you protect each other from any outside influence in terms of disease transmission. And this is a concept that will need to be understood. I know that when I'm explaining it right now, many people will have questions about it, but as we mentioned, the post-COVID world is undergoing a transition both in understanding and in how people come to understand the messages that we are giving. And we will have to come to understand a little bit more about how bubbles are formed. But to answer your question very quickly, yes, the boarding schools can function as long as we make it as a bubble, and they protect each individual within the boarding schools, protect each other from any external influence.
Just my last question to either the Permanent Secretary for Health and also the Head of Health Protection. With regards to that you mentioned earlier, Dr. Fong, with regards to the surveillance and expansion of surveillance being carried out by the Health Ministry, can you elaborate a little bit on this? And also, as my last question, will the fever clinics around the country remain open after all this?
I will let Dr. Alicia answer the surveillance issue.
Thank you, Dr. Fong. In terms of surveillance, first I think I'll talk a little bit about what we have in place already. So in terms of testing, there have been questions about who we're testing in the community. We have two different categories of testing. One is suspected cases and one is surveillance, sentinel surveillance. So suspected cases would be anybody who has recently traveled and has symptoms of COVID-19. They're treated as a suspected case. People that are coming off of our repatriated citizens from overseas who've been in quarantine for 14 days and we test them, they're suspected cases. Our healthcare workers who have been looking after COVID-19 patients, of course that has phased out now, they are the ones who also, they go into quarantine and then we test them after 14 days. They're in that category. And any healthcare worker that's been looking after a COVID-19 case and gets symptoms, we also test them. Then we have our sentinel surveillance. So we're testing people we don't necessarily think have COVID-19, but because COVID-19 symptoms are quite similar to other diseases, we want to have our feelers out there in the community to see if we have any community transmission. So we have been testing anybody admitted to a hospital in Fiji with respiratory symptoms, acute respiratory symptoms. They've been tested for COVID-19. We've also got certain outpatients departments across the country who've been testing a random selection of people with influenza-like illness or COVID-like symptoms for COVID-19. We're also targeting high-risk groups. So healthcare workers that have a acute respiratory illness, anybody who's in living in an institutional setting or working, for example, in our prisons, in aged care facilities, we treat them as a bit more high risk than the rest of the community. So we have enhanced surveillance for those groups of people. We will test them if they come up with symptoms. So similarly, when we are forming these VIP lanes, for example, once we start selecting hotels or transport companies that can transport tourists from Australia and New Zealand along these lanes, including those hotels, the Ministry of Health will be stepping up our surveillance for these bubbles. So any worker in that bubble who develops respiratory symptoms will be treated, escalated and isolated, tested. So that is how we are looking at enhancing our surveillance for COVID-19. And of course, the other indirect surveillance we have for COVID-19 is looking at our influenza-like illness across the country, and it's been following the expected trends for this time of the year. So we're right at the end of our flu season now, so all of our influenza-like illness cases have been coming down below the average, so there's no indication that we have any community transmission of COVID-19. We also look at things like our hospitalizations. Our clinicians are telling us they haven't seen any increase in people coming in with acute respiratory illness. So all of these measures will continue, but we'll also look at enhancing surveillance for those little bubbles that we opened up in terms of, so that we can move forward our economy. Thank you.
Yes, in terms of the mobile fever clinics, that's actually a very relevant question. It's part of the remodeling plan that we are now looking very carefully at how we can decentralize some of our healthcare provision and ensure that it is provided more outside the hospital setting. And at the same time, it reaches a greater proportion of the population. The actual remodeling details are quite complicated, but that is the general principle, is to reduce crowding in hospitals and reach more of the people that we were reaching with our traditional service provision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marioni again from Fiji One News. My question is directed to the Minister for Education. Ma'am, you spoke about psychosocial support for students. Can you just elaborate on the importance of this and who will be providing this support to our students?
Thank you very much. Yes, I did mention that. At the moment, we have divisional counselors that work with the divisions, and we also work with Ministry of Women. We also work with Empower Pacific, Medical Services Pacific. We engage their services to ensure that when issues have arisen in the past, we've used them. But this is a totally different thing we are going through. And as and when school resumes, like I said, heads of schools through the divisions would be better empowered to deal with these cases. But in any case, a teacher who teaches students, we expect the teacher to act in a role of a counselor when the need arises. But again, we have counselors working with the ministry, and they will be engaged to provide the much needed support.
Ma'am, just in terms of classroom seating, will there be any changes to classroom seating in our schools?
Well, obviously, Ministry of Health has advised us that there has been relaxation on social distancing issues, while the rest of the advice given by the health personnel in terms of keeping us safe, etc., will be followed. You've got to understand the Fiji situation. We have some schools that are overcrowded, but then we do have schools which have other buildings like libraries and science labs. So the onus will be on the head of school, and the advice would be given to the divisions as to how we will move forward. If I can actually go back on the question about dormitories, we are going to encourage parents who can have the students at day scholars. At the moment, we have about 109 hostels, primary schools, and we have 64 hostels in our secondary schools. And there are many students who live in the hostel but stay around the premises. So we will encourage parents to keep their children home, and they can attend these schools as day scholars. So that will also assist us.
Thank you.
Okay, my question is for the Attorney General. Can you please highlight when are nightclubs expected to open up again?
Anyone in particular? No, as the Honourable Prime Minister highlighted, and of course given the advice of the Ministry of Health, that there are obviously certain businesses that obviously aren't going to open as yet, and that obviously includes nightclubs. And as the Ministry of Health has also highlighted, that we need to take a sort of staggered approach. We don't want to start, opening up things or having measures that are extremely liberal simply to roll them back. And that would be actually a very regressive step. Remember, we are an economy that's very much driven by the tourism sector. This is one of the reasons why we have an enormous setback as far as the revenue streams are concerned. So people watch, people want to know how you're operating. Are you being cautious enough? Are you also at the same time opening up, the economy, your borders to create sustained livelihoods? As the acting PS highlighted, can have an impact, of course, on your health and your well-being. But we need to be able to understand that if we take certain measures, let's progressively do it. And of course, in certain instances, if it works out well, we have the community buy-in, everybody adopts the new norm, then we'll be able to liberalize a lot more, a lot quicker. But that's a bridge we need to cross when we come to it.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the balance between staying in the bubble, containing COVID, and ensuring that government continues to get the much required revenue and generation of income for businesses?
I don't understand your question.
What are your thoughts on the balance between staying in the bubble, containing COVID, and ensuring that government requires to get the much required revenue and generation of income for businesses?
Well, we are creating a bubble. We don't have a bubble as yet. You mean across borders? We don't have a bubble yet. We are creating bubbles. Fiji is taking the first step to create a bubble, the Bula bubble. Creating the Bula bubble because majority of our tourists actually come from Australia and New Zealand. Close to 70%, 65 to 70% of our tourism arrivals comes from those two countries. So we are saying that we're opening up a Bula bubble with them under certain conditions and recognizing the fact that they have dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic in a manner that is credible to our health authorities. So therefore we are creating the bubble. In the same way we are creating the Pacific Pathway with those countries under certain conditions. Now obviously if we start getting tourists under these conditions, it will mean that those hotels can open up. It will mean that those staff who actually work in those hotels can go back to work. It means that we have the international airport being operational. It will mean, as highlighted earlier on, that Fiji Airways starts providing those services, that flight attendants will again need to be, well, flight attendants need to be hired, retrained, because again, they need to go through various new measures, new way of service delivery. It's again in the framework, you'll see that. Fiji Airways got a new framework regarding the services. And then the revenue will start coming through that particular process because we've created the bubble, we've taken the first initiative. Now, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It will mean in the next few weeks or maybe a month's time, at least we've created the pathways, we've laid out the requirements, and then your travel agencies, your business organizations can collaborate and work together with government and themselves to be able to start facilitating this economic activity.
Okay, Australia have said that their borders may not open until the end of the year or maybe next year.
Yeah.
What is the potential impact of this with regards to bubble discussions?
They bubble discussions regarding Australia and New Zealand, the Trans-Tasman bubble. Please try and understand that we have saying now we've created our own bubble. So we are saying that we can accept Australian tourists, New Zealand tourists under these conditions. And we're quite happy to allow them to come to Fiji under these conditions. Yeah? Just, you know, again, I know it's a bit difficult, like there was asked by the acting PS about the bubble, you know, about the dormitories. In the same way with cinemas, that's what we're saying. So if, assuming the 5 of us are members of a family, we live together in the same house. If we go to the cinema, it doesn't mean we're at the cinema, we social distance ourselves. We are one bubble, so we can sit together. But assuming Leethe comes, she doesn't live with us, she has to sit 1.5 meters away. That's how the bubble works. In our case, regarding the Bula bubble, what we are saying is that we'll accept tourists from Australia and New Zealand under these conditions. You please come to Fiji. Now, that leads me on to, again, what Leethe mentioned earlier on about businesses and the way we do business. It's critically important also for our hospitality sector to understand that once borders start opening and other tourism destinations have access to their former markets, they will try and grab as much of the market as possible. Your Balis, your Phukets, all these destinations will scramble for the tourism market. It is critically important that the tourism sector in Fiji recognize what the government has announced today. We have put the first step forward saying we are welcoming our tourists back. Our health people have said that these are some of the risks, this is how you mitigate those risks, and we are then putting in place an economic recovery framework. So I'd urge those businesses, in particular the hospitality sector, please look at the way you run your business. Look at the margins you are making. There's obviously a lot of anecdotal evidence that our food and beverage is perhaps very much expensive. A Fiji Bira in some of the resorts cost $12, $15, when they can buy it from the supplier at maybe $3. So if they need to look at those margins, because if tomorrow Bali opens up, you can buy a stubby in Bali for $2.50. Before COVID-19, they might sell it for $1. $1.50 is simply to get back people. And then of course they'll put up the prices and get the right margins to have better yields. But our tourism sector needs to understand that. There's ways and means of attracting people. We are currently talking to Fiji Airways. Fiji Airways, together with Tourism Fiji, are talking to a number of the hotel properties to develop very attractive packages. And we hope that they will make those announcements soon. And also as highlighted again, as the acting PS highlighted and the Honourable Prime Minister did, that when, for example, Australian and New Zealand tourists come, because currently they're not COVID contained, We still allow them, but they can only go to certain resorts. Work with those resorts to be able to offer those packages. So we are putting a best foot forward, taking into account the health risks, mitigating those risks, and of course then putting in place an economic recovery framework.
A final question, and it's directed at the Acting Permanent Secretary for Health. At the beginning of the pandemic, and then somewhere along the middle, the instructions on the wearing of masks changed a little bit. Some of it was confusing. The WHO also changed their tune a little bit. In light of the fact that students and many workers may be returning to work in school in the next few weeks, can you tell us what is the Fijian medical authorities' advice on the necessity of masks? Are they useful? Are they counterproductive? What is the simplest way of telling us, can we send our children to school with masks?
The current advice that we got with regards to masks is that masks are mostly protective if you are sick and to protect those around you from getting sick. It's less protective if you are not sick and those around you are not sick. Good. Now, we don't know who's sick and who's not sick. So basically, the 3 C's generally apply: close contact, confined space, crowds. So if you cannot avoid those 3 C's, that is generally when the mask issue becomes more prominent and more important. It's less important in openly ventilated space, but it's increasingly important when you cannot avoid the 3 C's I mentioned: close contact, crowded place, confined space.
Would you send your child to school with a mask? Is that the right thing to do given the things we don't know? Do we send our children to school with masks?
I would send him with a mask in his pocket, and I would advise him on when and where to wear the mask. Yes.